All right, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us for the second statutory committee meeting relating to our higher education master plan in Tennessee. As a reminder for folks, this is a live stream. This is a public meeting, and we are recording this so that we can develop meeting notes and takeaways for the group. But I'd like to first turn it over to Dr. Stephen Gentile to share a few opening remarks.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you all today. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thanks for joining. I'm always in danger when I start rattling off who's here to thank you for all being here, but I want to thank you all for being here, who is here today. New to this group this go around, I see Commissioner Jim Bryson in from FNA. Good to see you. Dr. Lori Bruce, good to see you here as well. Dr. Cameron Kahn, the president of TACUA, as with the newest legislation that just passed, TACUA is now formally in statute as being on the Master Plan Review Committee as well. And I am very much grateful for that, because given the last conversation we had, I was thinking, it's sad that we're going to miss private institutions from these conversations. We have had a lot of meetings since the last time we met, and Amanda's going to go over a good number of those here, but overview of what's been discussed. But before I do, Amanda, do we have any public comment for today?
We do not.
Okay. And as a reminder, these meetings are more so discussion rather than landing on particular direction of where the master plan is going, to inform you on what we've heard, but for you to help guide us and where we need to go next. Since we met earlier this spring, we've had a number of breakout meetings. We're having in total 5 different breakout meetings where we're bringing people from institutions, from cabinet agencies, from organizations, from the systems, from private institutions, public institutions, here to Nashville to talk about different elements. We have our first meeting that focused on defining a North Star goal, the next drive to 55. I am calling that our first meeting, even though Weather made it our second meeting. But it was a good conversation that we had, and Amanda will go over that. We had another meeting that focused on finance, institutional finance, and financial aid. We had a meeting earlier this week about access and success, a meeting tomorrow about workforce development, and a meeting in the coming weeks about data. And a lot of your teams have been participating directly in them, and I appreciate that. In our first meeting, I discussed where I see this master plan going, or where it needs to go, and that is to address the declining perception and the value of higher education. And back then I talked about that on a number of fronts, and I've refined my thoughts from these meetings over time to recognize that our state has, as a system, has very much valued credentials and degrees and certificates coming out of post-secondary education, but we've not had a unifying force on research and development. And we've not really talked, in addition to workforce development, about economic development at the state level. Those themes have come out in the meetings that we've had. Other themes that have come out, and this has been from really all 3 meetings that we've had so far, is a need for alignment and simplifying systems. Our vision here at THEC has been to cultivate a cohesive higher education enterprise. In the meetings that we have had recently, it is clear that expands beyond their higher education institutions. Breakdowns in communication and operations and partnerships with the Commissioner of Education. That was something that Commissioner Lizette Reynolds mentioned as an example. We've got DHS, we have Workforce Labor Development, we have ECD, we have lots of cabinet agencies that are trying to address very similar goals, and we do work together, but we could be more targeted in how we do that. So bringing alignment, not just for institutions, but also across many different sectors that are addressing students and Tennesseans, that has come through. In our first meeting, the North Star Goal meeting, a big thing that was focused on was a lack of one higher education vision for the state of Tennessee. And I saw that as an indictment of THEC, and actually a push of where we need to go going forward, is to rally behind some true hand-holding goals. And Amanda's going to talk about what we've learned in that process. And then communication. we can get everyone on the same page. How are we communicating and effectively addressing the problems that are in front of us that happen between institutions or between the sectors? That has been a resounding theme that has popped up over and over again. But Amanda, you're going to lean in more and talk about the process and then what we're hearing directly from our all of our meetings. Amanda?
Yes. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. On Monday, you all should have received some information from me. One quick second. Can you all see my slides here? Great.
We can.
Thank you. You all should, as Stephen sort of mentioned and introduced, I'm going to talk a good bit about how we have gone or how things have been going so far with our master planning process. But first, I wanted to just take a quick minute to sort of remind this group about the process that we are undertaking in the development of our master plan. We are squarely now in phase 2 of this plan, which is represented by that middle column of activities. And as a reminder, Stephen mentioned this, we are hosting 5 different topical work groups. We are partnered with Education Strategy Group, who is helping us to facilitate these conversations. They're also conducting interviews with stakeholders to really kind of help understand at an individual level perspectives, thoughts, and feelings around our master planning process. ESGU is also planning to lead 2 focus groups for us, and we've decided that that's going to really help us center around hearing from students in particular. And then since we met last in February, what I wanted to mention was something that has kind of changed, or a new activity that's been added to this work. This recommendation came directly from THEC staff and was bolstered by feedback that we received from you all, as well as others in phase 1. Staff recognized that our planned structure did not necessarily capture the voices of the individuals who are really on the ground across our institutions and in K-12 settings, and as I mentioned, students as well. You all have also recognized the need for some voices and representation from outside of the education enterprise. So there are a few ways that we're responding to that. The first is by introducing some THEC-led focus groups. This is going to allow for us to gather like individuals from across our institutions or various entities to really dig in more deeply on their perspectives as it relates to higher education in Tennessee. We're also including these individuals as part of those topical work groups that we mentioned before. In addition, we're thinking about other ways to identify those non-higher education voices in this discussion. A focus group that I think I failed to mention, but is one that is, I know, important, is employers, and really hearing from those audiences about their perspectives for higher education in Tennessee. So as we get into early summer, we will be moving from this middle phase here, which is a lot of information gathering of individuals and the like, to moving to that phase 3, which is going to be writing the plan itself. But I wanted to take a few minutes to talk more about some of the activities that have taken place thus far. And really, as we dig in, I really want to check our understanding alongside what you all know as leaders of our campuses and leaders in state government in Tennessee. So as of yesterday, we have hosted 3 topical work groups: state investment and affordability, defining the North Star goal, and access and student success. Tomorrow, we will host our 4th group, which is focusing on emerging workforce needs and workforce alignment. And then our 5th topical work group will be hosted in mid-June. We've also hosted 1 focus group thus far, focusing on student financial aid administrators. And as mentioned before, we intend to host additional focus groups throughout this process. Again, I mentioned students, those adult students, as well as students who are more of the traditional age or directly out of high school, faculty, student support staff, high school counselors, institutional research, employers, and individuals in the non-degree spaces. But before I go any further, I'm curious, as I've just kind of rattled off that list, are there any other groups that are missing that folks think that they've not heard that they think we ought to consider for a focus group? If not, no worries. You all also have my contact information, so I'd be happy to have that follow up. In early June, so sort of that third part of this roadmap here, we will be convening our THEC-TSAC staff. And really that's designed to help us dig in a bit more deeply to what we're hearing in the master plan thus far and connecting that more directly to the work of our staff in specific. But this is really designed to be sort of an overview and reminder of our process thus far. So before I get into topical work group details, I want to pause here for any questions about our process or plan. Okay, there are no comments or questions. I will continue. So as I mentioned, our first topical work group was state investment and affordability. What's on the slide here were the objectives for this meeting. This meeting had representation from the Board of Regents, the University of Tennessee System, our LGIs, a private institution, as well as TCUA. This also included representation from the Governor's Office, Finance and Administration, the Treasurer's Office, as we think about coming around these issues and objectives. I won't read these verbatim for you all on this slide, but we really operationalized this work through a couple of activities. We hosted 3 presentations, one sort of setting the stage that was provided by me with much support from my fiscal policy team, so thank you to them. Kelsey Kunkel at the State Higher Education Executive Officers, SHEO, around the State Higher Education Finance Report, or SHEF, as well as Dr. Robert Kelchin, professor at the University of Tennessee at Knoxville, who helped really kind of set the stage for financial aid in Tennessee and situated our state, as well as talked a little bit about other state models. In addition to those presentations, we really had 2 activities that were designed to really get more information from our participants. Again, having a range of finance as well as financial aid experts in the room. What we focused on was really thinking through, one, what are the most important goals to achieve with post-secondary funding in Tennessee? Should our goal be to have the best funded system, the most affordable system, or some sort of balanced approach? And we did this through breaking out groups around 4 topical areas to really dig in on a series of questions that not only helped us better understand the challenges and opportunities, but also to set us on a direction for the future. Those 4 breakouts included operational funding, instructional costs, financial health, and student affordability. Our second breakout, or our second breakout for the day was really around setting priorities for financial aid in Tennessee. Asking questions like, are our financial aid programs making college more affordable? Where are there affordability gaps, and what are the pain points? And then identifying too what opportunities exist and how can we make the most of the financial aid we have in the state. What I'm going to do next is highlight just a few slides from that day's presentations to sort of set the tone for sort of some of the themes that our participants were hearing throughout that day. The first is this slide here. This may be familiar to some on this call, but looks at state appropriations, which are at the highest level they've been in decades in Tennessee. Really recognizing that Tennessee has had continued investment in higher education, and in fact, after adjusting for inflation, at the highest rates we've seen in a long time. So that's sort of part of the context that we're coming into this conversation with. The second is that students are not bearing the bulk of those costs from a higher education standpoint in Tennessee due to those high state appropriations. The slide here is one that's from the State Higher Education Finance Report. This is combining a balance of appropriations and net tuition revenue for both our 2-year and 4-year colleges in Tennessee. As you might imagine, our 2-year colleges, given the robust financial aid our state offers, tend to have a smaller share even of student-borne costs. But this really just emphasizes, I think, that we have strong financial investment in post-secondary. This is also considered in this particular slide to include financial aid. And we have a really robust financial aid portfolio, which helps to blend together to inform how our institutions are being funded and how students can afford post-secondary education. So on this slide here, I'm going to emphasize a couple of the themes that we and takeaways we have from our conversation. As demonstrated in the last two slides, Tennessee colleges are funded at the highest level they've been in decades, and Tennessee students bear a lower cost to achieving that credential than students in many other states. So really, I think a theme that we'd heard and was highlighted throughout these conversations was that there's a lot to be proud of and a desire to maintain that momentum as we look ahead. Our breakout sessions allowed us to hear from participants about how we should progress forward as a state in these various topic areas. And so in terms of financial health, the group highlighted uncertainty in the current landscape and a lack of clarity around who's responsible for what. The group also identified the need for metrics and thresholds to help us understand situations at our institutions, and that THEC should continue to prompt conversations around roles and responsibilities. The instructional costs breakout that I mentioned before also raised cost efficiencies as an area for greater elevation. Institutions and systems are finding these efficiencies and thinking about how the state can recognize that and improve and encourage collaboration in this space. An issue raised in this topical work group, and one that Stephen mentioned just a little bit ago, is around complexity of our financial aid programs. This too was echoed in our conversations with financial aid administrators, but this impacts both our students in terms of understanding the programs and their requirements, as well as those administering those programs. So there were various suggestions around how we could better align some of the financial aid that we have, as well as think through streamlining some of those details. This included, again, alignment of program requirements, potentially moving up the timing for tuition and fee setting decisions, among others. On number 5 here, this is an issue that I think has been raised now in every topical work group that we've had, but really touches on this issue of advising, both for students and families as it relates to affordability in higher education. Ideas around information sharing and shared understanding related to these various topics was also highlighted. So thinking through that financial literacy and understanding what is quite a complex program, ensuring that that is clear. And then finally, I want to close this synthesis with opportunities for THEC in specific as we look ahead. So again, I mentioned a few different places for streamlining and simplification that were raised. A need to align our aid programs and processes, improve flexibility, as well as an idea that was proposed around a singular application for financial aid. It was also highlighted that there's space for THEC to advocate and better advocate for the higher education enterprise. And this can be done through data analysis, convening, as well as ensuring transparency and shared understanding on the policy and the funding challenges that are facing higher education. So I know I've just spoken at you all a lot and provided a little bit more context to the points that you've got on this slide, but I'd like to turn it to you and really ask 2 questions. The first is related to this idea of financial health and financial sustainability at our campuses. To you all, how do you know, or how do we know that our institutions are doing well? I'm curious if you all have some ideas, thoughts, or measures as we progress this work forward.
Hi, this is David. I have a comment for the University of Tennessee. At every board meeting, we provide a full financial report to our board that includes a P&L for the system as a whole and a P&L for each institution. We also continuously monitor and report every board meeting our days cash on hand, our liquidity, and we also use, of course, the CFI, which is a backward-looking tool, but it's very helpful nonetheless. And we sort of in a mini way replicate that as a management team throughout the year. So we have a number of built-in tools that we use to monitor our financial health.
Great, thanks, David. And David, as a participant, if you've got any additional comments or thoughts you'd love to share, please.
Hargrave, University of Memphis. Echoed what David said. Ours is very similar as well. You know, one of the things that, and it was good to hear David talk about, looking at cash on hand and cash flow, it's interesting. I've been in higher education for 30 years, and until the last few years, no discussion was around cash flow. But that's, and I've been on lots of business boards, and every meeting you talk about cash flow, and I think we need to be talking more about that. So that it's good to hear David talk about that as well. I'm assuming that we all need to be looking at that, because it is something that, when we look at cash on hand, or our ability to pay our bills if something drastic were to happen, is a reality now, instead of something that we always had a cushion to land on if we didn't have the cash.
Thank you.
We can actually thank Governor Lee because he appointed a whole bunch of business people to our board. And so we've always used CFI and some things like that, but our board wants and insists on some real business metrics. So we do a traditional balance sheet. As I mentioned, the P&L statement. So it's been really helpful to have their input on all of this.
I'll take a stab at this from a state perspective, and I've got two different things to focus on. I not surprised whatsoever with what David Miller said about UT and the governing board there, and we heard President Oldham last week at the commission meeting speak to their close eyes of academic programs and potentially having to address low producing programs. From a state perspective, I think what we should be interested in is knowing if the governing boards are asking the tough questions, and training governing boards as well, what those tough questions might be. And because the nature of this conversation that came up in our meeting, in this specific meeting, we had people from the state. David Thurman was there from the state. We had institutions. It was a really good meeting. Was a focus on what we see right now at Tennessee State University. And I know President Dwayne Tucker is on this call, and he has been doing a fantastic job in communicating what took place before, and what questions were not asked by the governing board. Understanding what should be the expectation of governing boards, I think, is part of this conversation. Second, in our small breakout conversations that we had, what also came up, and for THEC to be a better advocate on, we're a good advocate when it comes to operating dollars and outcomes funding formula. And we try to be a good advocate when it comes to capital maintenance, although we have more to do in that space. But I think a place where we've come up short is better explaining to state partners the need for reserves, the need for those margins to help our institutions weather the good times and the bad times. And again, we see that with Tennessee State University right now, who have no reserves, given their scholarshiping issue. But we do get lots of questions. Institutions get lots of questions with skepticism about those reserves that they hold on. Us being able to better communicate why that's important, I think was a big takeaway for me.
Stephen, this is Mike at Austin P. I appreciate that comment. As we've tried to be good stewards and try to make sure that we've got cash on hand in case of problems. The frustration has been that those have become some political footballs that we've been trying to navigate as well. So so some help in that regard would be really impactful, I think, because our boards, as you heard, and my board here is similar to the others in the state. They ask the tough questions. They're on. I mean, the finance committee is the most engaged and active committee on our board, and so I'm getting those kinds of questions, and that's part of the reason why I'm squirreling reserves away every once in a while. But then they become challenge when it's when I'm down there in Nashville during session. So yeah, it's a balancing act. I get it that you don't want those reserves to be too big, but we need something, right?
Thank you for your comments. So as we're talking through some of these pieces, and as you heard what I was just sharing around some of the themes or takeaways, how does this resonate with your organization, institution? Does this feel like some of the issues or opportunities that you see for this master plan? Are there, yeah, I'm curious to hear how this resonates.
It's
Is there-
either resonating or landing like a thud. So someone.
This is Brian Nolan.
And this bill, there may be another slide, and I'm sorry I didn't have a chance to look at the slides ahead of time, where we talk about ROI. Now, this is on state investment and affordability. Is there another part we'll talk about ROI then from the state investment?
We will talk a little bit about goal setting in the next segment, but I'd be interested to hear your points about ROI as if it relates more specifically to this topic area.
Well, and again, don't let me get too far off topic here, but when we talk about state investment, I think every state, every donor, every institution should be thinking about the ROI on that investment, right? It's not just about, hey, we need to build this building, or we need to make this investment in this program. Why do you need to, what do we expect to get, right? I think the days of just building for building's sake or starting programs for program's sake are behind us. And we need to be asking, every institution ought to be asking, I know we do, what is the return on that investment? Is that going to help us with, in the R&D space, as Steve referred to earlier, from the research side? Is it going to help us attract more students, retain more students? What's the ROI? And for those that stuck around after the TEC meeting last week, and we were on the call with Wahlberg's staffer there, he talked about tangible ROIs on such things as TRIO and Gear Up and Pell and so forth. And I think as a state, I think we have to have a set of metrics, on our dashboard at all times that show when we make these investments, here's the return. And I think that as a state we have to show that the investments in higher education. I think as higher education institutions, we have to demonstrate ROI. I know that we have to do that, for the students that we're trying to attract, right? I mean, that's why the majority of students choose the major, choose the university they go to. What's the ROI? If I go to the University of Memphis and major in accounting, and I'm paying you, $25,000 a year, what's the ROI in the back of that? And so I think we have to have ROI as a central element to any discussions around investment. And I think that goes directly to affordability, right? Because, we, pardon, the expression, but, in higher education, you all have heard this, we're great at addition, we suck at subtraction, right? We never want to take anything away, but we want to just keep adding things. At some point, we have to have that ROI, and it's not just about adding things. We've got to be better stewards of the investments.
Thank you. And I think that was definitely right on topic. So I appreciate the inclusion. Dr. Nolan, did you want to say something?
Yeah, thank you. And I think part of this is just how do you want to frame the plan? When I think of state plans, you've got an access lens. Are our students ready for college? You've got an affordability lens. Does the system remain affordable for our citizens? You've got a completion lens. Are those students who starting finishing? Then you've got the ROI aspect that President Hargrave noted on. Are folks prepared for work? But then there's also the final takeaway is what's the net benefit to the state? So part of this just depends on how you want to frame it. I want to echo the comment from my colleague, President Licari at Austin-Peay. I think I'm probably skipping ahead a slide or two. You probably have that later on. But for me, it's just how are you going to frame all of this?
Well, and I think that that's very much something that will continue to be kind of developing. And so something that I think might be helpful is as we pivot to the next topical work group, really, as Stephen mentioned, originally designed to be our first, but is thinking through this North Star goal and really beginning to form up our broader vision for higher education in the state, which I think will help to guide some of these points.
I would add to that, Dr. Nolan, that I made this point yesterday in a working group that we had here on access and success. We received from that body a whole bunch of ideas about how to make financial aid better or how to better align across departments. And my point at the end that I shared with them is there are a lot of good ideas up here. These ideas themselves are not going to make it into the master plan. It's the themes that are coming out of it and what it's saying that the agency, THEC, and the state should be doing for higher education. The framing of this master plan, as I see it right now, is the value of higher education to the state of Tennessee. Bullet point under that, Tennesseans and students who are going to our institutions, it's communicating. It's identifying how to communicate that value and where we need to shore up as the higher education enterprise to make the value even stronger and clearer and transparent.
Thanks, Stephen. If there aren't any additional points here, I'll go ahead and move to our next segment. And we should have ample time for further conversation and discussion here. But I'd like to talk a little bit now about our second topical work group. So as I mentioned, this was called Defining the North Star Goal. Representatives from that are even on this call were a part of this conversation. We had the Board of Regents, the University of Tennessee System, our LGIs, a private institution in TCUA. We also had representation from our State Board of Education, Department of Education, Department of Labor and Workforce Development, the Governor's Office, as well as a member of our Tennessee Higher Education Commission. This group was oriented around these 4 objectives that you see here on this slide. Something I'd like to emphasize at the top is that we weren't planning to leave with a specific goal, but really the goal here was to start to identify those contours. What is the vision that we have? Speaking to something Stephen was just talking about, how do we understand sort of the details or the I use the word contours, but the contours of what this plan looks like. We operationalize these objectives through 2 presentations and 2 activities. I think a lesson learned for us from our first topical work group is a desire to maximize the time and opportunity to hear the voices of those who are in the participants in the topical group. We first heard from Kenyatta Lovett, who might be a familiar name to folks in the call. He is a principal at Education Strategy Group, who provided a bit of a history and context, the national context around value in higher education goal setting, which we'll talk a little bit more about here shortly. This really teed up a conversation or a SWOT analysis with participants, thinking through our strengths, our opportunities, weaknesses and threats. And this was something that then participants went ahead and we called it dot voting, but really just kind of identified areas that really resonated with them in this SWOT analysis. We then heard from Melissa Henderson at the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. They somewhat recently went through a master planning process, and that really, she shared a little bit about the process that they went through in Texas, as well as some of the goals that they laid out for their master plan there, again, centering some on the value proposition for higher education, which many of you likely have heard about in the news. These conversations all really culminated in an ideation activity where groups were asked to draft a vision statement for higher education. If we do these things, where will we be? And really focusing first on that, where will we be, that then part of that statement. Then we will have XYZ in higher education. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of the contours of those if-then statements here shortly. But like with the last topical group, I wanted to just highlight a few slides that folks that kind of are exemplars to the presentations of the day. This first slide was presented by Kenyatta and really kind of highlighted this evolution over time, focusing and really moving from that educational attainment conversation to value conversation, and really how we're hearing or seeing it at a national landscape entities kind of push towards this goal. I won't read all of these details, but we have this slide here as well as some additional information that I'd be happy to get out to the group. Up again, this whole conversation we were having around defining value in Tennessee. And I just wanted to use this slide here to sort of emphasize a few things that are highlighted in Kenyatta's presentation. And I think really, to me, resonate a lot with what President Hargrave was just also highlighting. Really that the field is dictating that value for higher education must be proved. It is not just assumed, and it's not just the more is better at this point, but really recognizing and needing to demonstrate the value that is higher education in our state. There are several examples of other states who have begun to think about this in terms of measuring that for their higher education goals. Value, of course, is something that can be measured in a variety of ways. And so really kind of leaving the group with thinking about how should Tennessee define value? And it's a question I want to get back to here in a moment with you all. This slide here is one from Melissa's presentation from the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. And what I really wanted to highlight with this one is that there are a couple of goals here embedded in Texas's higher education plan, focusing not only on the attainment of those credentials, which we know remains critical, that students not only enroll but complete those degrees, then focusing on credentials of value, and they operationalize that in a couple of ways, thinking through that return on investment, and then a research and development goal, really two goals that they have in Texas. We had about a 20 or 25-minute presentation from Melissa, and then Q&A with the audience to just sort of understand how another state approached this problem. So one of my last slides today is really to get back at the themes or the takeaways that we had from this Defining the North Star Goal meeting. Something this is really kind of synthesizing are those if-then statements that I mentioned a few minutes ago. There are many shared elements to the vision statements that were created. Oops. But we had small group breakouts for this particular exercise. And I've outlined some of those here. But as I mentioned at the beginning, the intent for this meeting was not to leave with a specific goal, but to again be able to kind of identify elements of this goal that we will have, or this vision, excuse me, for higher education. So I'll read through this here briefly, but really identifying that all Tennesseans attain credentials of value, and that higher education itself is not just about a job, but it's also personal fulfillment. And so thinking about that alongside those workforce needs is really critical. And I think a point that was emphasized in this meeting, that we should anchor to a system that promotes economic prosperity, leads to, I think this was a newly coined phrase, at least in my experience, independently thriving citizenry, and that develops lifelong learners. That this vision should encourage innovation and recognize that we need to be adaptable in higher education. There's a constantly dynamic environment, and so being adaptable in that way. Something that's come up in all conversations really, but is strengthening pathways, both to higher education, between higher education, and through the higher education enterprise to that workforce or that ultimate economic outcome. And that we should promote multiple paths to success. Increasingly, we are hearing conversations around non-degree credentials and the ability to map some of these credentials to one another and make them stackable ultimately. And so thinking about how we support students in Tennessee doing that. And then finally, and this is getting to some of the comments that Stephen made before, but I think is really breathing new or fresh air into the state's coordination efforts. And I think that to me feels like a charge to THEC that looks at improving communication and alignment and leveraging our data assets to really strengthen the enterprise, both from demonstrating that value that we've been talking about, but also really in helping promote transparency and understanding for the higher education enterprise. So I shared this question with you all previously, but I'd really like now, as that you've heard this kind of overview, to hear from you all. What do you see as the key elements of post-secondary value?
Amanda, this is Cam Dakua, and I was in most of these meetings, but I do think for us in the private sector, number one, your point number one about the credentials of value being both that personal fulfillment, satisfaction, finding their life's work and calling, in addition to just the numerical ROI and a job that pays well. Both pieces are going to be huge for us in making that distinction.
Thanks, Cam.
So Amanda, I guess I could share with you what we're trying to do at the University of Memphis, and I think it may extend beyond this from a North Star. It's something that we've really kind of focused on over the past year, and that is a successful outcome for every student as our North Star. And the reason why we've done that is that ultimately, right, I believe that every student who goes to, not every perhaps, but the vast majority who go to higher education now are looking for, they're looking for that ROI. As I come back to what I talked about earlier, right? What happens when I graduate? Did it prepare me for the workforce? Did it prepare me to go into professional school? Did it prepare me to go to graduate school? But what is that outcome? And so we are really focused on that because that informs you, right? If you think about the outcome and you work backwards, I mean, our outcomes funding formula, the state works that way, right? So I think we have to have something, when we talk about the North Star, we have to have something around the outcomes, because ultimately that's why we're here, right? It's not about just getting them in and hoping they do well. It's about getting them to the finish line, and that so that they can go on to the next step. So I don't know where that factors in. So I'm kind of struggling as to how to articulate what you're looking for, but we've put that out there for ourselves as a successful outcome for every student to flavor everything we do, because that tells us what programs we ought to offer. It tells us what curriculum we ought to have. It tells us what the student experience should look like, and it tells us what students we ought to be admitting, right? It flavors the whole thing if we stay focused on that, for us, that North Star.
I really appreciate that point, and I think it fits in perfectly with the kind of the question I was hoping to get answered. And hearing too, I think your explanation is one that's really important, and I think something that was raised through these conversations, which is really leaving with something meaningful, tangible to what is their next step, that being those students. And so thank you for that point.
I liked the conversation that we had around this. It was Nathan James, actually, from the State Board of Education, who I think coined the thriving citizenry portion of that conversation. It was really good. There's been lots of conversations in the state in the last couple of years about credentials of value. And oftentimes we get hung up on a credential of value should be one that you come out making a high income, and contrasting that with other credentials where it might be a median income or so. I think, though, from the state's perspective, I want students who want to go to college and get a higher income to be able to do that, but to also leave with a credential that links with a job that is in demand. And maybe it's not the highest salary. Maybe, I mean, gosh, some of our most high demand jobs are not paying all that well, teaching, social work, etc. However, that Tennessean is going to have a credential that will set them up for a life well led ahead of them, and in the state's interest, can buttress them against having to go on Medicaid or TANF or SNAP. That's a value to the state as well.
So this is Phil Oldham. To echo what's already been said, and particularly Bill from Memphis. The way I frame it here on campus is relevance. We've got to be relevant. That's the bottom line. And the problem I think we face when we try to create strategic plans like this is we're not necessarily talking to the right people about what's relevant. Students today, sometimes they know what's really relevant to them. Sometimes they don't immediately, but ultimately they decide based on what they think they need. And so, and certainly employers have an idea of what's going to be relevant to them. Hopefully the state and state leadership has some idea what's relevant to them. I mean, that ultimately those are all our customers. We need to find out what resonates with them as relevant and set about doing that. And every institution, I think, needs some space to do that in a way that makes sense for their region, for their expertise, their capabilities. But I agree with Bill. You got to work from the outside in. You got to work from the outcomes, determine what's going to be relevant, and then work backwards to try to encourage that activity. So I'm not against any of this, but I'll be honest with you, none of this really excites me. So that's kind of where I am.
Thank you for those points, Dr. Oldham. And I think your relevance point is relevant is a really important word here for us to be thinking about.
Amanda, if I may add one more thing here. Sorry, I don't want to dominate the discussion here, but just as I was thinking about the comments that were just made, and we actually start thinking far ahead, right? I mean, sometimes we get caught into what's happening right now in defining this, and we ought to be looking very, very far ahead. So this is going to look way out there. So you can just probably ignore what I'm going to say because it's way out there. But if you think about what's happened in the demographics in the country from a population perspective, I think somewhere around 2060, the U.S. hits its population peak and then starts to decline. And we're already starting seeing the decline in the 18-year-olds, right, in the country. And we'll see that and it'll level off. And then we know that, right, and these are not predictions, these are projections, right? Because we know how many people were born, we know what our immigration rate looks like. So if we look out that far, this is a arms race, zero-sum game between the states. Because so some states are going to lose because people are going to leave that state and go to another state. Some states are going to win because they're going to attract people into that state. They're going to attract students. We know that when we attract a student into this state to go to college from out of state, the vast majority stay in the state. If we have a good, robust job market and we have attractive higher education, we can be a brain gain. And I think we ought to be thinking about, again, this may be too far out there, but those states that have a net positive brain gain are going to win in long term. So that's probably way too far out there, but I just throw it out there for consideration.
There's your word, brain gain.
Well, that excited me. President Oldham, what would excite you?
Well, I think some things like Bill mentioned would get attention, quite honestly, because the rest of this is just sort of business as usual, or maybe incremental improvement, which is important. I mean, it's all good, but I think well, I don't want to analyze what you mean by North Star goal, but to me, that's something ambitious. That's something very forward thinking. And I think, I don't want to put my hat on as a state policymaker, but if I was in their situation, that's what I'd be looking at. I'd be looking at, okay, well, how is the state of Tennessee going to be positioned 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 40 years from now, in a way that's competitive and successful? I mean, we're pretty good at certain things right now. some of those things won't persist, into the future. So what's going to be the next thing? And how do we invest strategically in ways that position us better for that future competition? Those would be the things that would get my attention, quite honestly. The challenge we all have, and we don't talk about it much, most of the jobs that our current students are going to be filling in their careers haven't even been created yet. I mean, that's the challenge we all have, is we're trying to, in some cases, trying to fit, round pegs into square holes. Because we're using old systems and old ways of thinking to try to project what's going to be important 10 years out. And it's hard to say. I mean, what's artificial intelligence going to do to all of us? We don't know, but we better be figuring it out. And so how do you create that kind of vision that really cuts people loose and makes people not so risk averse to be able to try some things and do some things that would better position the state of Tennessee in the future? I think that's what would be really exciting. I come back, and in the group I'm in, I've harped on general education. We have created our own jail cell with general education in the state. It's built into statute. For a 4-year degree, it's a third of the cost and time to a student is general education. And if you survey 100 students about the value of general education, I bet you'd get a 90% response that it was not worthwhile. And yet that's what we do, because that's what we're told we have to do. And so I think we need to be willing to really attack some of these issues that are not going to be helpful in the future. And I think a strategic plan that gives us that flexibility would be really a good idea.
Can I jump in here? Because I actually love the conversation here and what's been said. I'm kind of catching up, so if I cover things that have already been covered, let me know. But I really love the idea. I'm not sure exactly what we're trying to completely accomplish. I love the idea of a North Star goal. I think the Texas numbers and the definitions that are in front of us are good and they're helpful, but that's not the goal. That's not the thing. And I want to encourage us in a couple of ways. One is, this is a really complex situation. You've got all these schools with lots of complex organizations all over the state, in one group. So there's a lot of complexity here. And I think I want to applaud the effort to push through and understand all of that complexity and get to the simplicity of what we're really all about. Right. And just really push through that. And one of the things I guess I was curious, I'm going to ask it and leave it on the table. I don't really need an answer, is have we just simply collected the mission statements from all of the institutions and said, look at these and let's see what we're all about. Right. And I'll just leave that there. But I love the idea of, I think what I'm hearing people say is there's a Tennessee brand, a Tennessee communication that may be, in addition to, maybe is a way to say it. I'm not sure how to say it, but there's a Tennessee brand, there's a Tennessee communications that supplements or reinforces or supports the local university's brand potentially. If we're competing, is what I'm hearing some of the presidents say that we're kind of looking for, is what's that North Star for the state, not necessarily for each individual institution who is kind of working their own way through. I would personally like to see, as we go forward with THEC, is a way to, I don't know if celebrate's the right word, but to incentivize or promote not just making things bigger, but making things better in a sense of, maybe there are some things that need to be changed or that need to be taken out of one school or another. And I know you all are doing this kind of thing all the time, but my perception is that there's this desire to kind of make it bigger as much as we have the capability to do so. And I think just being able to really celebrate really how well things are going. And I think that kind of also comes from a position of, I think at some point we also have to be, I think what Dr. Oldham said is right. We need to be looking at what is higher education. Maybe we need to change some of the statutes around that and get to kind of release the universities to meet the needs of the market. And what do we do with that? And what needs to happen there? And that needs to come from you all, because it needs to come back to the General Assembly. So I just think there's a lot of things that this opportunity, this plan could really help with if we kind of push through all the complexity and get to the end goal. It's been my experience that if you find your real why, your real being, what we're all about, creativity flourishes, and so does and success flourishes, because you've got a common goal. And I think that's what I hear a lot of people saying is, let's get to that, whether it's something around outcomes, whatever that is. But I really encourage this group to do that, even though it means pushing through and working through a lot of difficult complexity around it. I think we can get there. So those are just some thoughts, I guess, that I've had as I've been listening. I hope they're somewhat on point. But those are thoughts that I have, and I really appreciate the opportunity to kind of be here and hear. It's a great conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Bryson, and really appreciate your points. To your point about mission statements, we do collect those. And so that is, I think, a really good exercise for us to take another look at and see where there's alignment or overlap with some of the themes that we've pulled out here today too.
I think he was saying this better not be just a ChatGPT version of mission statements, though. So, yeah.
For UT, we concur with everything the president and commissioner have said, and said better so not to repeat. But sometimes when we're doing this exercise, we get into the tactics and activities rather than the goals. So I think currently, this slide, we're looking at tactics and activities, not actual goals. If we ask students what they want, from their universities and technical colleges and community colleges, for their education system, they wouldn't say, we want you to coordinate better and leverage data. Those are activities. So we need to evolve. Well, what are these activities for? As opposed to the doing of something.
Thanks for that comment, David. And I think it's definitely something, as we're thinking through, some of the details of this vision statement, how we then translate that, I think, to this goal. And something, like I mentioned, we did not intend to leave with something specific, but this conversation in particular is really helping me think through some of, I think, those steps where we're taking this. And I just want to say that I'm really grateful and appreciative for the comments and thoughts thus far. And I'm curious if any others have any points to share around what we've discussed so far this afternoon.
I think I need some clarity here. So defining the North Star goal, when we thought about the need to have that conversation, it is, let's just nakedly say it, it's the next drive to 55. It's the next rallying cry. It's the next big, hairy, audacious goal. It's not a vision statement, and I think maybe that was a confusion point here. These are takeaways from what we heard in that meeting, pointing the direction to what a big, hairy, audacious goal could be. And I just want to clarify that here. That said, something that Phil Oldham said was, and I agree, like, higher education is fantastic. It works very well. It's a wonderful thing. It's also broken and can be can be greatly improved upon and has all of its barriers. What I heard from Dr. Oldham, and maybe this is where we think about how to get to that goal, is how do we fashion a goal that is numeric driven? Perhaps that's the easiest way to think about what a goal is, but have it be so that we at the state level, with institution support and other support, are pulling out the stops to help our higher education enterprise get there. So that we are leading the nation and attracting the industry here. What is holding ourselves up, and how do we address that, and then back into a goal, what that looks like. So I'm kind of rambling right now, but I've really appreciated this last 10 minutes of conversation here.
Well, Stephen, to that point, I mean, to some extent, we got a bunch of racehorses here, and you don't want to put a plow on them to hold them back, and that's sort of what we've done, probably with good intentions at times, but we need to let these horses run and give them some space to do that. The other thing here I think is really important, and I don't know if you guys have thought through this at all or not. It's just the socialization of this and the politics involved in it. I mean, the timing of this is a little tricky because we're going to be changing administrations in the next couple of years, and I think, with all honesty, the next governor, if whatever comes out of this is not significantly aligned with the next governor's primary objectives, then it's going to struggle. It's going to have a hard time. And so, I don't know how we do this in a way that gives us, if you want to go ahead and get it out of the gate and get it started, that's fine. But it's going to have a way to adjust to be incorporated into the next governor's agenda. Otherwise, we're going to have a real problem.
No, I agree with that, and the main reason why I agree with that is because you made a good point of that too, and beforehand, and we took that and are thinking about strategies on how to do that. That's a problem that's going to be affecting a number of strategic plans that are under development right now by multiple entities, and we're all kind of working together and planning for how do you overcome that, because at the same time, right now we can't just wait 2 years before we have a direction of where we're going. So we need to act now, but there are strategies that we're considering with other partners, with other plans on how to get that buy-in. And it's a really important point. And thank you for that.
If there aren't any other points, something that I want to really, I think, sort of reiterate, or I kind of highlight here, this being sort of designed to be the first meeting, these topical work groups themselves are also going to kind of help develop some of the contours of this work. And so what we are working on right now are some summary documents that we would intend for this group to be reacting to, but also eventually public-facing documents that sort of summarize some of these themes that we're hearing. And then really hoping to shift as we look ahead to that writing phase, to gleaning again additional kind of inputs and thoughts from this body, both written as well as at our next statutory meeting. And so what I wanted to close with this afternoon was just a quick kind of reminder, some expectations that things you can expect of us over the next couple of weeks and months. Again, continuing to provide monthly updates via email. We've been really in the thick of that phase 2 of our work at this stage. And so I think you should expect to see more content-rich information crossing your desks or really inboxes here soon. Again, I want to mention the listening tour, we're calling it, or interviews with ESG, to dig into some of these findings and themes in a bit more detail. We will be having a working session with our commission in early August. I can't think of the date off the top of my head, but that is a public meeting where we're really going to be digging into this a little bit more. And then we're looking forward to gathering you all together in person for a meeting on August 18th at 1:30 p.m. This should be on calendars. We will be sending you all details closer to that date, but really designed to be a space where we're hopefully really digging in and reacting to aspects of this work. And then something I want to highlight, and speaking to Dr. Oldham, your point just a few minutes ago, is really designing all of this around release at our October trustee event. So when we're bringing together, as Stephen mentioned earlier, trustees from your campuses, as well as aligned with our responsibility to help with trustee onboarding, we really are going to launch the plan there and hopefully have some really good dialogue with the broader higher education community in that regard. So we still have a lot of work underway. We're continuing to synthesize and analyze these pieces. And before closing, formally want to see if there's any additional comments or thoughts before we wrap this afternoon.
Just want to thank everyone for your engaging insight and feedback today. Thank you. And to everyone who's working with you in your offices or institutions, hands-on, I appreciate them as well. Thank you.
With that, I'd like to thank you all for your time. Thank you again to you and your staff for participation and engagement throughout this process. Really grateful for all of the rich comments today. We will be getting you meeting minutes much closer to this meeting as opposed to shortly before the following one. So be on the lookout for those. And I want to just say thank you all again for your time this afternoon. Have a great rest of your day.